أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I begin this khutbah with praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His bounties and seeking His forgiveness for our sins and shortcomings. May Allah guide us to do that which is good and to avoid all that which is evil and brings His displeasure and punishment in the hereafter. Before we continue with the khutbah, let us remember the Shuhada, the martyrs of the recent bombing in a school in Afghanistan. This is one of a number of attacks which has targeted the Hazara community, and they have suffered greatly over generations. And the only reason why they are targeted in this merciless manner and in this terrible manner is because they are followers and lovers of Imam Ali and of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam. So really, even if we don't have any connection to Afghanistan or any connection to the Hazara community in our own family or in our own circle of friends, it is a tragedy that is close to our hearts, because we know that Ahlul Bayt, and in particular the Imam of our time, Imam Mahdi alayhi salam, they are grieved at times of tragedy like this, and we know from the teachings of our religion that our Imams and the Imam of our time, they have the greatest love and the greatest sympathy for those who are the most vulnerable and those who have no one else to speak for and advocate for them and their rights and their interests. And the community of lovers of Ahlul Bayt in general, but in particular the Hazara community, it is a instantiation of that group of believers for whom our hearts bleed and for whom Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam will also be in great grief and mourning. So for the shuhada of that vicious attack, let us recite Surah Al-Fatiha. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In our khutbah a few weeks ago, we talked about the importance of a masjid and how it is a center for a Muslim's spiritual, religious, but also social and material life. Every society expresses its values not just in its words, but also in its actions. And historically, in our Islamic civilizations, it was the pride and the priority of Muslims that their most well-appointed, beautiful, spacious, centrally located places were not stadiums and places of entertainment, or markets and places of commerce, but masjids and places of worship. That is not universally the case, but it was certainly the ideal and the aspiration. And that says something about the values that our Muslim societies we tried to uphold. We tried to pass on to our children and our coming generations, that our home and our priority is not just to have a beautiful house for myself, but rather to have a beautiful house for my soul, for my community, and for the development and strengthening of my religious identity. We spoke of a number of ahadith in this regard, and I want to just mention a few more ahadith, inshallah, because of the importance of this topic, and then in the second khutbah we will move on to another area of teachings of Ahlul Bayt. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. There is a hadith attributed to our Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, in which he draws a comparison between shaitan and a wolf, which hunts animals, and in particular, when people with livestock and farmers, when they would take their sheep out for grazing, one of the main fears was that those sheep were subject to attack by wolves in the wild. This is something that was familiar to people in Mecca. There were not a lot of agriculture, but there was some animal husbandry, and also in Medina, which had farming, and it also had animals as well. So people were familiar with the importance of protecting their sheep. And many of us, we can also imagine, this is a vivid image. If you don't have experience in shepherding sheep, then put the image in your mind and imagine how it is relevant to ourselves as well. The hadith says that inna shaitan dhi'bul insan ka dhi'bil ghanam. Shaitan is like a wolf for people, just like there is a wolf for sheep. Some people, they don't like to be compared to sheep, and they might think that that comparison is not respectful to our humanity, but it can be very instructive, and if it elevates us out of a common misconception that we have, then it is not demeaning, but rather it is enlightening. So don't think the Prophet is comparing us to sheep. The Prophet's point is to compare shaitan to a wolf, so that we are on guard against a cause of spiritual harm, sickness, and death. So what is the similarity? يَأْخُذُ الشَّاةَ الْقَاسِيَةَ وَالنَّاحِيَةَ. When a sheep comes and attacks, then the sheep doesn't come to the main group, the wolf doesn't come to the main group of sheep that are all together in a large group that have the shepherd near, probably the shepherd dog nearby. That's not where the wolf will attack. The wolf will find a sheep that is grazing alone, away from everybody else. And that is the one that is most likely to be attacked, and if attacked, is the most likely to be lost. فَإِيَّاكُمْ وَالشِّعَابِ وَعَلَيْكُمْ بِالْجَمَاعَةِ وَالْعَامَّةِ وَالْمَسْجِدِ. Now, the Prophet ﷺ says that stay away from separation. Stay away from putting yourself out in isolation, and stay with the Jama'ah and the Amma and the Masjid. Now, why do people come out in isolation? Generally, we come out and separate ourselves from the large group because we see something that is missing in the large group. Maybe, for example, and I've heard this from parents, that I've raised my children very carefully not to see bad language and not to have any kind of negative influences. And then when you come to the masjid and there's other children of similar age and they might get exposed to language or jokes or something which I want to avoid. Or there might be adults sometimes who think that the standard of practice or the standard of religiosity that we find in our communities is not up to par. And so I'm better off on my own. Now, in some cases, that is true. There are many families that said, I'm going to take my children out of public school and put them in an Islamic school and assume that they're protected. And that doesn't mean you're safe. All of the same media, all of the same temptations, and all of the same problems, they are going to be found even in an Islamic environment. Even right next to the haram of one of our imams, you will find internet and you will find people who will sin. In fact, in some cases, shaitan, he aims for those places where mu'mineen are found and where people are trying to be pious. So you have to be on guard. You have to be careful. You cannot let down your guard if your children are going to an Islamic school or if they are going for ziyarah or to an Islamic country. And you cannot let down your guard if you are coming to a masjid. But we have to also recognize that over the long term, our religious life is going to be ensured if we have our primary intimate relationships with other Muslims. Not that we don't have friends and acquaintances and good interactions with non-Muslims, but our primary intimate relationships, the people that we are most influenced by and that we influence the most, if those relationships are with people who also at least have the same orientation and the same qibla, they may have many faults that I can see, and probably I have many faults that I am blind to, but they can see. But because our qibla is the same, even if there might be some difficulty, some hardship in the short term, over the long term, over one's life, over one's generations, you will find a great deal of barakah and benefit. So one of the things that this hadith reminds us is that sometimes people, they separate themselves because they want to be a better believer. And they think that the mainstream is not as practicing, is not as intellectual, is not as careful, and does not act on precaution as much. And so for those reasons, they say, I want to be one of the elite. And they forget that that might give you some short-term efficiency, but it takes away your long-term depth and ability to form a community based on belief. So it harms yourself. But even more importantly, or I should say equally importantly, it also harms your community. Because my presence in that environment is also to not just be influenced, but also to influence. So it will moderate me, but it will also benefit those that I am associating with. Now, we have a hadith within the teachings of Ahlul Bayt, and there are a hadith from Ahlul Sunnah that talk about the importance of Jamara. There is not the same understanding and interpretation of Jamara. Both the Ahlul Bayt And those who did not follow Ahlul Bayt, they have narrated and mentioned that it is important to stay with the Jama'ah. But Ahlul Sunnah in many cases interpreted the Jama'ah just to be the largest group. And Ahlul Bayt informed us that you should want to be with a group, meaning you should not just want to be on your own. You should not be the kind of person who finds faults in any group project and then you kind of have a tendency to self-isolate because nobody fits your standards. But when you join a group, it's not the largest group, the mainstream. Al-jama'atu ahlul haqq wa in qallu. The jama'ah is people who have the knowledge of the truth. And ahlul haqq here means they have the not perfect practice, because nobody is going to be perfect in practice other than the ma'asumeen, but those who have the right beliefs. So if your jama'ah is a small group, then don't be afraid. Don't think that, well, I need to go and join a larger group, even if they don't have the knowledge of true doctrine and beliefs of Islam. Follow what is right. Ahlul Haqq are your jama'ah, but try to come together. And therefore, the Prophet says, according to this hadith, alaykum bil jama'ah wal amma wal masjid. Be present in your community and with the common people and in the masjid. Don't think that you are better, and don't think that you are better off by being separate. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The other aspect of a masjid that I would like to just mention briefly is to honor a masjid. We spoke earlier that it is important to build, and it is important to keep alive and thriving and flourishing a masjid. Then the next step also is to honor it and to make sure that we are more concerned about the maintenance and the upkeep and the cleanliness and even the beauty of our houses of worship, our Islamic centers, our Husayniyas, our masajids, our musallas, than we are of any other property or even our own homes that we may live in or that we may own. There is a large number of ahadith that speak of the reward of a person who sweeps or picks up trash or even something very minor from the masjid. In the interest of time, I will just mention one hadith. There is from our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi that man qamma masjidan, if a person stays after in a masjid, in a house of worship, and cleans it, cleans the qumama, like the dirt that gathers here and there, كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَهُ عِتْقَ رَقَبَةٍ, Allah will write for that person the reward of freeing a slave. And as you know, to bring freedom to slaves was one of the reasons why Ahlul Bayt, they used to earn money. Most of the time we earn money because we need it. And if we get a large inheritance, or our investments go up unexpectedly, or we've saved enough for us to survive and we think that we have enough in our retirement accounts, then we start thinking about retiring. Because our idea of work is for our needs. But Ahlul Bayt, from Amir al-Mu'mineen Imam Ali alayhi salatu wassalam, to our later Imams, including our fourth Imam and our later Imams, they would focus on freeing slaves. And they would buy slaves just to free them. Now, they wouldn't just buy them and free them, because in many cases, that would put them in an unfair economic situation where they would suffer. So our imams would buy the slaves, give them honor, give them training, and then when they were ready, basically when they would graduate with the ability to have their own family, to have their own livelihood, then the imams would give them their slaves their freedom. But the point is that the imams would earn so that they could afford to buy a slave, train a slave, and free a slave. Not earn so they can buy a slave and then have the slave serve them. So they could buy a slave to train and then to free the slave. So this is something important. And the Imam said that if you want to have that reward, عِتْقُ رَقَبَةٍ, which Allah mentions in Surah Al-Balad as well, just cleaning a masjid so that it is ready for worshippers. You might not even use it. That gives you that reward. وَمَنْ أَخْرَجَ مِنْهُ مَا يَقْضِي عَيْنًا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَهُ كِفْلَيْنِ مِنْ رَحْمَتِهِ. And if you remove even just an amount that if it would get into your eye, a speck, then Allah will give you 2 measures of His mercy. The 2 measures have been explained by ulama as referring to the rahmah of this world and the rahmah of akhirah. A measure in this world, meaning your life will have barakah, and a measure in the hereafter, meaning you will be forgiven. So it's not that, if you have a large masjid, then to get the reward, you have to go from one corner all the way to another and clean it all up all night, and then you can get thawab. Ma yaqdi aynan, meaning just something that if I were to go into sajda and it were to go into my eye, then it would cause my eye to tear up and it would irritate my eye. That's called qada. If I pick that up, I remove that and throw it away so it doesn't bother anybody. It doesn't come in their eye. It doesn't get under their foot. Then you have that rahmah, kiflayn min rahmatih. Rahmatul dunya and rahmatul akhirah. The point is that we should come with that spirit. Not that I am attending, but I am here as a caretaker to help the house of God and the house of Ahlul Bayt and the house of our community to thrive and to flourish. When I see a napkin, when I see an empty water bottle, when I see a stray piece of paper, when I see anything outside, inside that is not in its proper place, I don't say, well, the volunteers will come. I'm not going to call out and say, when you clean up, remember, the closet has certain things that need to be picked up. There is a trash can over there that needs to be emptied. But I consider it to be my honor to do it myself. Because why do we come? We come to serve Allah. We come to earn the reward of Allah. And if Allah is telling me that if I shorten my ta'qibat and I help clean up, then I will get kiflayn min rahmatillah. I will get rahmatul dunya and rahmatul akhirah. Then what kind of person would say, no, I'm going to spend extra time in nafilah and I'm not going to have the time for the volunteering, or I'm going to just do my ibadah and then I have to go. Well, that means that I wasn't there for thawab and I wasn't there for the rahmah of Allah, or I didn't sufficiently realize what is it that is going to give me that benefit. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant all of us the tawfiq to honor and to keep alive and to benefit from the reward that comes from getting together as a community and from honoring our houses of worship and our masajid. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar. Fasalli li rabbika wanhar. Inna shani'aka huwa al-abtar. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وعلى علي أمير المؤمنين وعلى فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين وعلى الحسن والحسين وعلي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة بن الحسن القائم المهدي صلوات الله عليهم أجمعين صلوات. In the second khutbah, I will just introduce and begin our next topic of teachings that we have from Ahlul Bayt rahimus salatu wassalam for our life to be filled with barakah and blessings, and in order for us to live a godly life. We will inshallah continue this topic in our coming khutbahs. One of the areas that Ahlul Bayt have focused on is for us to be responsible and to take good care of our material wealth and the blessings that Allah has given us in order for us to be able to live and to thrive in this world. Islam does not take us away from being a wise and a careful investor and owner of material property to only think about the hereafter. But rather, Islam wants us to think of this world as a bridge and a means to the hereafter. And if something is a means, then for it to be effective, it needs to be well taken care of. If you have a car that you commute on every day, then you want to make sure that that car is reliable. You can't just drive it without any concern for whether the tires have a nail and might be leaking or something else might go wrong at any time. If you have tools that you need for your work, then you have to make sure that you have the dependability. If you work remotely, you need to have a reliable internet connection. You need to have so many other things. So if the dunya is a tool and a means for the akhirah, then it would be like a taxi driver who doesn't take care of his car, a remote worker who doesn't care to have a reliable computer or internet connection, a carpenter who is careless about whether he has all of the tools that he needs or not. That will not allow you to live your life and to earn your livelihood. And you will not earn your religious livelihood if you do not care about dunya. As the Quran says in Surah Al-A'raf, وَلَقَدْ مَكَّنَكُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَقَدْ مَكَّنَّاكُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَجَعَلْنَا لَكُمْ فِيهَا مَعَايِشَ قَلِيلًا مَا تَشْكُرُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we have established you within the earth and we have created for you means of livelihood within the earth. قَلِيلًا مَا تَشْكُرُونَ. But generally, people are not grateful. Meaning that they don't recognize it comes from God and they think that it comes from some other source or because of their own smartness or their own effort. Or they recognize it comes from God, but they don't use it in the way that God has commanded. That is also a lack of shukr. If I send a thank you card to you and you give me a gift, but then you come to me in my house and you find that the gift is thrown away somewhere in the closet or in the shed, half broken, collecting dust. I said, Alhamdulillah, Ashukrulillah, I gave you the thank you card. But how are you going to feel? Are you going to say this person is grateful, this person is appreciative? Or are you going to be discouraged from giving me a gift again? Gratitude is not just in saying it, but it is also in utilizing that gift in the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught us. One hadith from Imam Ali, and then we will conclude for today. Sallu ala Muhammad. Very beautiful hadith, not necessarily what we expect or associate with Imam Ali. But that's because sometimes we have a wrong image and a partial understanding, not wrong entirely, but wrong because it is limited and it is partial and therefore inaccurate. In our imagination of Imam Ali, we tend to think of Imam Ali as a person who ate simple food and wore simple clothing and therefore didn't care about the world. He wore simple clothing, he ate simple food, he lived simply because that was his responsibility as the Imam and the Khalifa of the Muslims. But he didn't have a lack of concern for this world, nor did he teach people to have a lack of concern for this world. Imam Ali, when he had a simple dress, if you were to look at the properties of Imam Ali, they were well managed, and he had a lot of property. And they produced a good income. And in fact, Imam Ali mentioned this because this was one of the accusations, especially in the time of Uthman, the third caliph. People said, well, how does Imam Ali think he can be the caliph? He doesn't have any kind of managerial experience. Sometimes when there's an election, people say that you don't want to just elect a politician, you want to elect somebody with executive experience, managerial experience, business experience. So in the time of Uthman, the third caliph, there was so much wealth coming in from the new conquests and from the trade and other sources that some people said this to Imam Ali. So he showed them that if you think I don't have an income, he just gave them an inclination of his income for a few weeks. They were surprised at how much it is. And then Imam Ali said that I don't use it for myself because I consider it to be a means for akhirah. Don't think that I don't manage my properties well. Sometimes we might think that if you really care about akhirah, then things will be falling apart. And you're not going to be on top of your worldly affairs. So the hadith of Imam Ali, which is different from many of our mental image, نِعْمَ الْعَوْنُ عَلَى تَقْوَى اللَّهِ الْمَالِ. If you want to have something to help you be pious and to remember Allah, نِعْمَ الْعَوْنُ عَلَى تَقْوَى اللَّهِ الْمَالِ. To have money and to have wealth is one of the best things that can help you be pious to Allah, because that is a source of independence and stability, which helps you in your material life. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us responsibility in managing our worldly affairs so we can use our worldly blessings to come closer to Allah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Inna Allah ya'muru bil adli wal ihsani wa ita'i dhil qurba wa yanha 'anil fahsha'i wal munkari wal baghi ya'idhukum la'allakum tadhakkarun. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Salatul Jamara. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah.